Hi family, friends, Mark Tandle here in my home in Hartwick, New York. I want to make hopefully a brief video about my tribute display to my favorite drag strip racetrack ever, Orange County International Raceway. And my story there, well, it starts when I was 13 years old, living in Orange County, California. And I heard a truck pull up in my front yard, and I went outside, and the guy was honking his horn. A friend of mine lived in the neighborhood, Ron O.C.I.R, and his dad owned O.C.I.R Construction, and O.C.I.R Construction were hired to build this racetrack, and they were the ones that were building the tower. And they needed somebody to come along and help put up the guardrails, which I have represented by these popsicle sticks going along down the center strip. And they asked if we could come help. And they weren't going to pay us, but they'd feed us out of the concession stand and give us tickets to the first opening show in August of 1967. So I was 13 years old. And I hopped in the back of the truck and went to the station, or to the drag strip. And then as it turned out, the railings that went along the side of the strip all the way down the track were, gosh, I think they were about 2,000 feet long. And there was two crews, one on the spectator side and one on the pit side, and they had a big augers that were digging these deep holes, and then a truck with the big posts, and another truck with cement, and guys that were cutting off the posts at an angle, and then that's when me and my crew came along. We were the ones drilling a big hole through it and then putting a huge bolt through the post and then attaching the railing to the post. And my own particular job, I was only 13 years old, but I was the guy using the big huge crescent wrench or ratchet wrench, and I was the one tightening the bolt on all these things, and somebody else would cut off the excess, and we went down, and we ended up being a race between the spectator side and the pit side, and we beat them by I'd say about 150 feet, or about 6 lengths of railing, just how fast we were working. And one of the owners, this guy Michael, he was so impressed with our crew, and they were giving us the hamburgers and hot dogs and stuff. And I remember getting a vanilla shake. And he was very much impressed with me. I was only 13 years old, and he said, well, young man, I'm going to give you this card here. It's my business card here for the track, and I'm going to sign it on the back. And he hand wrote on there my name, Mark Tandle. And he put lifetime membership, free admission, including pits, and he signed it. And then he put his initials on it. He goes, anybody that works here, they see this initial, they'll know this is legitimate. So I ended up getting free admission to Orange County International Raceway from the time I was 13 years old until the time I was 16 years old, just by helping them assemble the guardrails. That was in June '67. The track opened up later on in August. But then by the time I was 16 years old, I acquired this 57 Nomad that you see right here. It's a little bit covered up. Actually, when I bought it, it was the white and brown that you see on something like that right there. It was down the street and from where I lived, and it had a for sale sign on it. I knocked on the door, and the people that owned it, I guess it was an old guy who just had a stroke, and his wife said the car's too big for her to drive, and it was just a 14-year-old station wagon to them. It was 1970. So I bought it for only $238. Had one of those first B8 283 with a 2-speed power glide on the column. But at the time, I was working for Al Martinez Custom Paint and Body in Santa Ana, California. I got one of their posters around there somewhere. And so I drove it to work, and everybody there at the paint shop said, well, nice cars, flawless body and all that, but you gotta, get rid of that weak, small block, and you gotta put a decent paint job on this thing. So the next thing I did is I went to see Ray Alley, which would be this fella right here. Ray Alley's Engine Masters in Garden Grove, California. And because I met all these people, Shirley Muldowney, there's Sachs and Martin's 71 Colt. I had a 71 Colt too. That was just awesome. I love that car. There's my Nomad. My second car was a 62 Impala SS409. My 68 Camaro was awesome. My 55 Ford panel truck. There's pictures of all these cars along here. Unfortunately, they're covered up because I've just purchased too many cars to fill in my collection. So anyhow, I had Ray Alley. We put a 65 Corvette 327 punched out to a 362 with all the best parts inside, Mickey Thompson pistons. The whole thing was balanced, blueprinted. The heads were ported, polished, and it had all the best parts. And then it ended up turning 428 horsepower on the dyno to the rear wheels. And because I had a respectable engine, Al Martinez said, well, okay, I tell you what, now that the car's respectable, let's put a respectable paint job on it. And he said, I won't make any paper on this job. You talk to the head painters, Danny and Gary. You work out some kind of deal with them. There's my panel truck, the Moose, and my 62 Impala. And so I looked at Danny and Gary, and they go, we've been waiting for this. In fact, here's what we think you should do. We want to paint it candy apple red, which is represented by this car right here, my candy apple red 57 Nomad. And we've agreed that Danny said, Mark, typically on a full-size car like that, candy apple red paint job, you're looking at about $5,000–6,000, and my cut on that would be at least $800, probably $800 to $1,200. But we agreed that we'll paint your car for $100 each, and I was just stoked. I couldn't believe it. And they go, but you got to help us do some wet sanding, that kind of stuff. You got to help us get the job done. So I did. So Al Martinez Custom Paint and Body painted my two-tone 57 Chevy candy apple red, and we put in a 428 horsepower 327 with a 4-speed. It had a Hurst clutch, pressure plate, linkage, shifter, the whole thing. And so it was, I think, the third day of the track being open. Somebody from the Ford crowd got up into the tower, and they were saying, we would like to invite all the Ford Mercury guys to come hang out with us in the parking lot. We'll show a little pride in our manufacturers, but we're not going to get greedy. We're going to take a spot in the parking lot that's kind of far down a ways, so we want to invite you to join us. And so that's what happened. And then the only thing not represented here is the bleachers and the big 8-foot high chain link fence that was between the track and the parking lot. I wasn't going to waste space on something like that. But they hung a big sign up there that said Fomaco, Ford Motor Company, which I have represented by this thing right here, Fomaco. And my little Ford sign fell over. That represents what they kind of hung up on the fence. So all the Fords started parking down there, all the Mustangs and the Mercurys and the the Galaxies and the Fairlanes and the Cougars and all the Ford guys. So naturally it wasn't, but the next race all the GM guys were invited to join each other, all the Chevys and Buicks and Pontiacs and even Cadillacs. If you owned a GM product, you parked in the middle of the area, and so naturally that led to all the Mopar guys. They ended up at the best spot closest to the ticket booth, which is kind of represented right here because it was over in this corner of the property, and they used to put all the expensive collectible show cars in that area so people would see them when they bought their tickets. Well, all of them are represented here, the Batmobile and the Munstermobile and the Count Draculas, all of that, and my favorite Ferraris and the Gidget cars and a whole bunch of them, Count Baron cars, even the Blues Brothers cars. So all the Mercurys, Fords, GMs, and Mopars all used to park together, and they learn after a while that you back in so you can pop your hood. A lot of foot traffic, you want to show up your hood. If you park nose to nose, nobody can see your car or what you have under the hood. And then that led to all the Volkswagen guys kind of parking all down together. And then there was a Ford van club that I joined because I had a 55 Ford panel truck. They always wanted me to join their club, but I said, I'll park with you, but I'm not spending any money to join the club. But as you can see, I represent here how the parking lot ended up looking. Here's a bunch of Volkswagen square back and what, a Golf and a BW and a dune buggy and a lot of the roadsters, the open engine roadsters. And then getting on to the track itself, what ended up happening in the parking lot, and man, I tell you what, that parking lot turned out to be, this parking lot here is well represented. There's, I think, 256 vehicles just in this parking lot here. And it turned out to be one of the coolest car shows you'd ever see anywhere. And then somebody got really smart. The owners of that Dodge funny car, he was a Dodge dealer. And he started parking a Dodge truck out in the parking lot selling Dodge and Mopar parts to the people out in the parking lot. And that led to this parking lot not only being the biggest, coolest car show you'd see every now and then, it turned out to be a huge swap meet where people would sell all kinds of stuff. If you had like an intake manifold for a small black Chevy, the guys here would, with their, Delco truck, would sell you one, or if you were looking for Ford parts. So that turned out to be, the big deal in the parking lot was a car show and a swap meet for all the various cars. Then there were lots of different clubs, like there was a Nomad Club. And they used to ask me all the time to join their club. I said, I'll park with you again, but I'm not paying for, to stay there in your club, or they were too far away anyhow. So all these different clubs, there was the Mopar guys, they were really the most respected, especially a club called the Hemiroids. And there were lots of some Barracudas and Cudas and Roadrunners and GTXs and Dodge and Daytonas and all represented all some of these cars right here. I have representatives of basically some of the best, most legendary street cars ever. Those are all the rear window 64 through 67 Barracudas, and then the 70s and 71s. Anyhow, then they started having some really cool races. Most notably, as these signs say, 100 funny cars at the Funny Car Manufacturers Championships. And that's exactly what it was. And in 1967, I think it was 1970, the first one that they did. But anyhow, I even have a copy of the radio advertisement saying, bring your cameras to the county, O.C.I.R, the super track, Fans, we're going to attempt something never thought of before. We're going to try to line up 100 funny cars down the length of the track, and we're going to fire them all up at the same time. And folks, that's exactly what they did. They lined up 100 funny cars down the track and lit them all up, and it was the most thunderous sound I'd ever heard. And you can become addicted, infected, and injected, and all that stuff to drag racing if you'd never stood next to a top fuel dragster before, and that thing fires up 20 feet away from you, and the ground shakes, and it sets its tires on fire, and the smell of nitromethane and burning rubber. It's my all-time favorite race car right there, Big John Mazmanian's 70 CUDA. My first favorite race car ever was Mazmanian's 68 CUDA. I just loved that thing. It was so cool. And jet cars. And then when Big John came out with his 70 CUDA, it was like, oh, whoa, are you kidding? That thing was just too cool. So that's my all-time favorite race car right there. And another race that you had to see, if you missed this race, the Fox Hunt, and your friends asked you, did you go to the Fox Hunt? Or I didn't see you at the Fox Hunt. And if you said you didn't go, they're gonna laugh at you, because the Fox Hunt, the racetrack, had this deal. It's a big meet, a lot of pro cars and all that good stuff. If you bring your girlfriend and she happens to be wearing a bikini, she gets in free. So at that race, the Fox Hunt, they'd have like 5,000 girls walking through that racetrack, all over wearing bikinis. And you wanted to be there for that event. It was just too cool. So the manufacturers meet, the Fox Hunt, the PDA, Professional Drags, the World Championship Finals. They had some huge meets there. And I was there at the very last drag race, which ironically I was there at the very first drag race and the last one back in 1983 with my girlfriend. And that's the shirt that she was wearing there, the last drag race. These were all shirts purchased at Orange County International Raceway. And so I started building this collection. And it represents the track at like the major events, like for instance the manufacturers championships. By the way, these are all photographs here of legendary wheel standers, and I think I have 12 of them represented right there, including the Hemi Underglass and the Little Red Wagon, which are right there. And I also have Pure Hell and Pure Heaven, which are down there in the altered row. And I have a whole row of legendary dragsters, Shirley Muldowney's and the Don Garletts, all them. Some real legendary rear front engine dragsters, the old Stingers and stuff. A lot of them are represented here. Tommy Ivo and a bunch of others. They're rambunctious. And all the legendary gassers and the super stocks and stock eliminator cars. And some of the more legendary pro stocks, they're all represented here. Jim Grumpy Jenkins and Dick Landy and Sox and Martin. Even Richard Petty's 65 Barracuda, and the safety safari at Orange County International, for the NHRA's represented here. Even the timing squad that did all the timing made everything official. And a lot of the manufacturers, when they would show up, like Dean Moon grew up in Southern California. His dad had a diner, cafe, big lot behind it. He built a small go-kart track. So Dean Moon grew up racing and building, tinkering with cars, building his own race cars. Pretty soon he started building his own equipment, and he built a really cool aluminum foot gas pedal. It looked like a cartoon foot with toes and everything. It said Moon, and he had a friend of his who was an artist at Disneyland make the Moon logo with the eyes. So he started selling those gas pedals, and then the fancy gas cans, the aluminum gas tanks, people would buy them, put them on the front of their cars. So Moon racing equipment became famous. And then, because he made equipment for all the different manufacturers, he represented that with his race team, Fords, Chevys, and Chryslers. He would show up with a dragster and a couple of roadsters and maybe one or two funny cars, representing all the different parts that he would sell. You know, the old race on Sunday, buy on Monday routine. So when the Moon racing team showed up, they showed up in force. That's why they're well represented here. And the tower, it was a six-sided tower. It was really cool. There was always a camera and a crew up on top, and sometimes they would bring a helicopter would fly over top, depending on how big the race was. And these are just some of the photos, iconic photos of Orange County International Raceway. That one there, that's a little bright light in the corner where it says spectator. That indicates he was the winner. But they both had identical ETs, and the guy on the losing side was, gosh, about 5 miles per hour slower or faster, but he lost because the other guy, he won on a hole shot. He left first, he got there first, even though they both took the same ET. That's why that picture's there. It's a hole shot win. Those are all my cars. My 57, my 62, my 68 Camaro, my 55 panel, and my 71 Colt, which I love. That thing would beat Corvettes, Camaros, and Mustangs. It was an overhead valve, hemispherical dome, horsepower with 210 horsepower. That thing was so light, positive rear end. And so I want to run down the funny cars here so we can see. I think there's something like 60 of them here represented. And the way I have them is lined up similar to the way the track would have them lined up, on the event. So it took me quite a while to go through. I believe there's 428 total pieces in this display, with over 300 individual sellers. And I would take a picture of what the last piece I bought and send it to them with more pictures of this display. And next thing you know, they send me an offer of 3 or 4 more vehicles at like 20% of the cost. Along this back wall, I have some of the manufacturers, product manufacturers. They're along the back because, like, there's a picture of the pits, and the track ran alongside the Santa Ana Freeway. It was just south of it, and they didn't have a lot of room there. And they used to tell the big manufacturers selling their products, they'd say, you can't just park those big rigs anywhere you want. We want you to park it along the fence. Leave yourself just enough room to get in and out of your trucks, and then bring a smaller vehicle, which are represented here by all these small vans and pickups. Bring a small vehicle to distribute your wares through the pits, which was about a half a mile long. So that's what you see here. All these manufacturers, like all of them. Excel Ignition was in my car. I had all Mr. Gasket gaskets. Everything that you see here is all parts that I had. I had an Edelbrock Lowboy intake manifold. I had hooker headers. I had Hurst shifter linkage, pressure plate. I had a Holley 850 dual feed carburetor. Goodyear tires, off ram filters. So that's the way the pits used to look. And all the various vehicles coming into the pits, hauling their vehicles. All the funny cars had their own starter truck, which would pull them out to the track back then. In the early days, they used to push start those things to get them going, but then in the mid 60s and early 70s, they would pull them out with a tow truck. So a lot of those are represented right next to the car that would tow them out. You know, like Bruce Larson's right next to his Camaro, and Don Perdome and such. So this is my display. I didn't want it to be too long in this video, but this is my tribute to Orange County International Raceway. Today is what, November 23rd, 2025? So if you happen to like drag racing, hot rod cars, and that kind of stuff, I'm going to back up and take a couple still photographs. Try to get the whole thing in here. Well, have a good day, you all. I hope you enjoy this video. My tribute to Orange County International Raceway, the county, the super track.